Society tells us that turning 50 means, well, buying a red sports car, right? Or bracing for this inevitable empty nest depression and basically hitting the absolute rock bottom of the human happiness curve.
Yeah, that's the classic Hollywood trope, for sure.
Exactly. But what if hard empirical science proved that almost everything we believe about midlife is, just a massive statistical illusion? Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a sledgehammer to those myths about the middle years.
And it is a really vital dismantling, I think, because those cultural myths, they actually prevent us from understanding what is arguably the most complex and critical phase of human development.
Right, because we've spent decades intensely studying childhood development and, the aging process in our twilight years.
But the middle has just been this great neglected frontier in science.
It really has. So we're grounding our entire exploration today in this landmark 2020 paper. It was published in the journal American Psychologist, and it's titled Midlife in the 2020s, Opportunities and Challenges.
Yeah, authored by a really brilliant team of researchers, Frank Infurna, Dennis Gerstorff, and Margie E. Lackman.
And our mission for you on this deep dive is to completely reframe how you view those middle decades. So rather than this period of crisis or inevitable decline, we're going to look at the data showing midlife as the ultimate pivotal period.
It really is a high-stakes pressure cooker. You have individuals acting as this crucial bridge, literally holding multiple generations together.
And understanding that bridge is just critical, right? Because the health and the success of middle-aged adults, that directly dictates the well-being of both the young and the old. They are the anchor of the human lifespan.
Absolutely. But before we can really explore the mechanics of that anchor, we need to clear the slate of all those societal assumptions.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the loudest one, which is the midlife crisis.
Oh, right.
We treat it as this inevitable biological milestone, like puberty or something. Like someone hits their late 40s, they panic about their mortality, they blow their savings, and they just upend their whole life.
Well, the empirical data paints a remarkably different picture. Research consistently shows that only like 10 to 20% of people actually experience a midlife crisis.
Wait, only 10 to 20%?
Yeah, exactly. For the vast majority, it simply does not happen. And treating it as this universal normative event is not just factually incorrect, it's actually medically dangerous.
Right, because if society tells us that misery and panic are just normal symptoms of turning 50, we start gaslighting people out of seeking real medical intervention.
Exactly. We write off biological or psychological distress as a sitcom punchline.
Right. If someone is experiencing severe clinical depression or chronic anxiety or even just unexplained physical fatigue and their doctor or their family just writes it off as, oh, it's just a standard midlife crisis, they're ignoring highly treatable symptoms.
It's a huge problem. And, the same flawed logic applies to the empty nest syndrome.
Oh, yeah. Culturally, we assume that when adult children finally move out, parents, and particularly women, just fall into this prolonged, devastating depression because they've lost their primary identity.
Yet the source material shows that for many women, the exact opposite occurs. When you remove the daily, intensive demands of active parenting, the data shows women frequently find new, fulfilling roles in their communities or their careers.
Wow, so it's actually a time of growth.
Yeah, and couples often use this newly reclaimed time and energy to reconnect. The adjustment only really spirals into distress if the parents and the adult children have severely clashing expectations about the child's life path.
Okay, so otherwise, the universal empty nest depression is largely a myth.
Pretty much, yeah. Which brings us to perhaps the most pervasive myth of all, the U-shaped curve of happiness.
Ah, right. This is that widely cited psychological theory that human well-being starts high in youth, drops to absolute rock bottom in our 50s, and then climbs back up in old age.
Right. And if the U-curve of misery is a myth, that completely reframes how we view major life events.
Oh, wait, I want to challenge this a bit because I have seen the study showing that dip in happiness. Are you saying the data itself is fake?
Well, no, the data is real. But the conclusion drawn from it is a massive statistical illusion. It's totally driven by flawed methodology.
So?
The famous U-shaped curve comes primarily from cross-sectional studies. That means researchers are asking different people of different ages how happy they are at one single moment in time.
Ah, okay, I see where this is going. If you're doing a cross-sectional study in, say, the year 2020, you're comparing a 20-year-old's happiness to a 50-year-old's happiness right then and there.
Exactly.
But you aren't actually measuring the effect of age. You're measuring the effect of entirely different generations.
Precisely. It's called a cohort effect. That 50-year-old grew up with entirely different historical events, economic baselines, and cultural expectations than the 20-year-old.
So you're literally comparing apples to oranges.
Yes. To truly understand how aging affects happiness, you have to look at longitudinal studies. Those are studies that follow the exact same individuals over decades, tracking their personal emotional changes as they age.
And when you follow the same person from age 20 to age 50, what actually happens to the math?
The U-shape completely disappears. The longitudinal data shows that well-being is remarkably high and incredibly stable throughout midlife.
That's amazing.
In fact, emotional experience generally shows upward trajectories. As people age through their middle years, they become neurobiologically and psychologically better at regulating their emotions, filtering out negativity, and focusing on meaningful goals.
I want you to just pause and think about your own assumptions about aging for a second. If you're approaching midlife or, in the thick of it, realizing that this narrative of inevitable decline and misery is just a statistical illusion that is incredibly liberating. It changes the entire roadmap.
It really does, but it forces a profound question. If midlife isn't defined by a crisis of buying sports cars, what actually defines it?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The researchers argue it isn't strictly defined by chronological age at all. Like, if you ask the public, they guess midlife is roughly age 44 to 59.
Right.
But scientifically, it's defined by what they call role constellations.
Role constellations. I love that term.
Yeah. It's not about the candles on your cake. It's about the sheer volume of hats you are wearing simultaneously. People in midlife can juggle up to 8 distinct high-stakes roles at once.
8 roles. That's intense.
Right. You're a spouse, a parent to growing kids, a caregiver to aging parents, an employee, a manager, a community leader, a financial provider, a health advocate. And the average person in this demographic is balancing 4 of these massive roles at any given time.
And the sheer volume and density of that responsibility is just unique to this specific life stage. No other age group carries that exact constellation of structural weight.
Honestly, listening to this, it sounds less like a crisis and more like being the central dispatcher at a massive, chaotic train station.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, if you think about young adults, they're just laying down their tracks. They're figuring out where their routes go. And older adults have retired a few routes, so the station is a bit quieter.
Right.
But the midlife adult is standing in the control tower managing peak traffic in all directions. They're making sure the incoming trains from their kids don't crash into the outgoing trains of their careers or their aging parents. It's peak operational capacity.
And managing that peak traffic requires peak cognitive abilities, which is where we see the hidden, scientifically backed superpowers of midlife.
Superpowers. Okay, tell me more.
Well, this is a time of peak earnings for most people. Hitting the late 40s for those with less formal education and the early 50s for those with more. But more importantly, it's the absolute peak for what psychologists call crystallized cognitive abilities.
Crystallized cognitive abilities. So because they're leaning on that crystallized intelligence, they're drawing on decades of accumulated knowledge, pattern recognition, and problem-solving experience. So they're actually uniquely neurologically equipped to handle that dispatcher traffic. You don't have to learn how to solve a problem from scratch. Your brain instantly recognizes the pattern from past experience and applies the solution.
It's incredibly efficient. And along with that cognitive efficiency, midlife adults show measurable peaks in self-confidence and control beliefs.
Control belief.
Yeah, it's the psychological conviction that they can successfully navigate their environment and actually affect change.
Well, they need every ounce of that confidence because midlife acts as a temporal bridge across the entire human lifespan. It literally connects the past directly to the future.
The biological and psychological connections here are fascinating. The data reveals that your childhood experiences, things like the socioeconomic status you were born into or the specific parenting styles you experienced, they directly predict your physical health in midlife.
Right.
And in turn, your midlife health acts as a biological crystal ball for your old age.
The paper gave a perfect example of this mechanism. High blood pressure in midlife directly predicts cognitive decline and dementia in old age.
Yes, because the chronic high blood pressure damages the microvascular systems in the brain over decades.
But interestingly, if someone only develops high blood pressure in old age, it does not have that same predictive power for cognitive decline. Midlife is the crucial linchpin. It's the period where the biological bill comes due for your childhood and where you lay the permanent foundation for your later years.
So you have this highly capable central dispatcher holding the past and the future together. But the source specifically refers to the 2020s as an unprecedented intergenerational squeeze.
The intergenerational
Yeah,
split.
the traffic at that train station has fundamentally changed due to modern historical shifts in life expectancy and economics.
Right, because I was wondering, haven't people always had aging parents and growing kids? Why is it suddenly a squeeze in the 2020s? We need to look at why the role of bridging generations is far heavier today than it was, say, 50 years ago.
It really is.
Let's look at the downward direction first, the adult children. The paper discusses the evolution of modern parenting, noting the rise of helicopter or even bulldozer parenting, where parents highly orchestrate their children's lives and clear every obstacle.
But it's not just a shift in parenting styles, is it? It's a shift in structural economic reality.
Right.
Due to prolonged higher education requirements, astronomical childcare and housing costs, and massive labor market volatility, adult children are far more reliant on their midlife parents for much longer.
You aren't just launching your kids at 18 anymore. The data shows more grown children are living with their parents now than a decade ago. You're financially and emotionally relaunching them at 25 or 30.
Exactly. And while you're supporting those adult children facing a brutal housing market, you are simultaneously looking in the other direction. Up the family tree to aging parents who are living longer than any previous generation, often with chronic illnesses.
Oh, the caregiving statistics in this source are just staggering. 44 million U.S. adults provide unpaid care to a family member.
44 million.
Yeah, and 54% of those caregivers are in midlife. And get this, 60% of them are juggling this unpaid caregiving with a paying job. They're spending an average of 2.5 hours a day on unpaid care.
Wow.
And we have to remember that 2.5 hours isn't just sitting and chatting over tea. That is navigating labyrinthine insurance calls, managing complex medication schedules, driving to appointments, and literally physically lifting ailing parents. It's double, sometimes triple duty caregiving.
The sustained stress of that daily 2.5 hours has profound physiological implications. It severely interferes with paid work, it completely eliminates personal recovery time, and crucially, it fragments sleep.
Which accelerates that biological weathering we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Furthermore, we have to look at how the role of grandparenting complicates this squeeze. The research shows an inverse U-shape when it comes to the health benefits of grandparenting.
So an inverse U-shape means there's an optimal dosage, right?
Precisely.
If a midlife adult is doing a moderate amount of grandparenting, helping out occasionally, building a bond, passing down family history, it actually boosts their cognitive function and longevity. It provides immense purpose and social engagement, which is highly protective for the brain.
But the other side of that U-shape represents a severe health crisis.
And what happens there?
Well, the modern era has seen a massive rise in custodial grandparenting. That's where the grandparent is forced to take on primary, full-time custody of the grandchild.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this is increasingly happening due to systemic crises affecting the birth parents, such as substance abuse epidemics, incarceration, or military deployment.
And while these custodial grandparents are providing an immeasurable safety net for their families and for society, the toll it takes on them is just devastating. They face severe financial strain, total lifestyle disruption, and significantly higher rates of physical and mental health issues because their immune systems are just crushed under chronic stress.
Absolutely. You cannot spend hours a day providing physical care for an ailing parent while managing a full-time career, while also trying to financially float your adult child without it fracturing your foundation.
Right.
The text heavily emphasizes the extreme financial vulnerability of this period.
So what does this all mean for their wallets? Middle-aged adults are highly sensitive to labor market volatility. They suffer from stagnant wages, blatant age discrimination when trying to find new jobs after a corporate layoff, and a steadily shrinking social safety net.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is. But the most shocking statistic is this. People age 45 and older have the fastest growing rate of bankruptcy in the country.
And we really have to understand the mechanisms driving that bankruptcy. It's largely fueled by two intersecting financial crises: exorbitant out-of-pocket healthcare costs for themselves or their parents, and co-signing exorbitant student loans for their children.
They are literally bankrupting their own futures to bridge the generations. Because if you drain your savings or take on huge debt at 55, you simply do not have the decades of compounding interest required to recover that capital before retirement.
And that financial devastation bleeds directly into the body. The source solemnly discusses the alarming rise in what researchers term deaths of despair among middle-aged adults.
Deaths of despair. That's a heavy term.
It is. These are premature deaths caused by suicide, accidental poisonings, often drug overdoses, and liver disease from alcohol abuse. We're also tracking sharply increasing rates of chronic illnesses, rising obesity, and severe sleep problems in affluent nations.
But the research makes a critical point here. This systemic pressure is emphatically not shared equally.
Right.
If we look at the diversity gap, the compounding inequalities present in early life just explode during the high-stress years of midlife. Lower socioeconomic status individuals, Black and Hispanic populations, and LGBT adults face significantly higher risks for these poor mental and physical health outcomes.
Because resilience in midlife often comes down to the ability to purchase relief.
Exactly.
If you're an affluent triple-duty caregiver, you might have the financial resources to outsource the pressure. You can hire a home health aide for your parent, or pay for expensive daycare for your grandchild, or even just order meal delivery to save time.
But if you don't have those resources, the entirety of that physical, emotional, and financial labor falls squarely on your own neurobiology. You cannot outsource the stress.
No, you can't.
Which brings us to a critical turning point. Identifying these specific crushing pressure points means we also know exactly where to apply solutions to build resilience. The researchers break this down into personal interventions and systemic policy changes.
Right, on the personal front, the research highlights a highly successful psychological intervention for physical health called implementation intentions.
How does that work?
Well, when you're a chronically exhausted caregiver, setting a vague goal like, I need to exercise more, is destined to fail because it doesn't account for reality. Implementation intentions fundamentally change the cognitive approach by managing time barriers through precise if-then planning.
So instead of a caregiver just saying, I need to jog, they use an implementation intention like, when my mother takes her 2 p.m. nap, I will do a 15-minute yoga routine in the living room.
Exactly. It connects the desired behavior to a highly specific situational cue. This bypasses the need for willpower when they are already cognitively depleted.
That's brilliant.
It significantly boosts actual physical activity because it respects the reality of their overloaded schedule.
And for mental health, the text highlights the success of accessible online social intelligence training programs. These programs actively strengthen the brain's prefrontal cortex, enhancing perspective taking and emotional regulation.
And what's incredible is that this simple training actually showed measurable results in mitigating the lingering effects of past childhood trauma.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It proves the power of neuroplasticity. Your brain's ability to rewire trauma and build new resilience pathways does not stop at age 30. You can actively upgrade your emotional software in midlife.
That is so hopeful. However, we have to be brutally honest about the limits of personal interventions. You cannot simply yoga your way out of profound systemic bankruptcy or a broken healthcare system.
Absolutely not. Real resilience at a population level requires macro-level policy changes.
The researchers objectively report on the desperate need for paid family leave. In the United States, it is incredibly rare. At the time of this study, only a handful of states, I think roughly 8, plus DC had extended paid family leave to cover caring for an adult relative.
Which is wild.
Everyone else is basically forced to play Russian roulette, choosing between keeping their job to pay the mortgage or staying home to keep their ailing parents safe.
The study also strongly advocates for corporate initiatives,
Yeah.
specifically increasing schedule control and flexibility for midlife workers.
Yeah.
When workplaces give employees the autonomy to manage when and how they work, the data shows proven biological reductions in psychological distress for double and triple duty caregivers.
And it makes perfect biological sense. If a worker has the autonomy to shift their hours so they can take their father to a morning chemo appointment without fear of being fired, their chronic cortisol levels drop. That reduction in stress hormones directly prevents the high blood pressure that we know leads to cognitive decline later in life. Giving workers schedule autonomy is a pragmatic, biological intervention that improves health outcomes and drastically reduces corporate turnover.
We have traveled a vast landscape today. We began by looking at midlife as a punchline, a cultural joke about sports cars and fading youth.
Yeah.
But the empirical science reveals midlife as the most structurally complex, vital, and overloaded period of human development. You are at the absolute peak of your cognitive powers, leaning on a lifetime of crystallized intelligence. but you're also bearing immense, largely invisible societal pressures.
You are the central dispatcher keeping the entire station from collapsing. I want you to look at the middle-aged adults in your life, your coworkers, your parents, your friends, or maybe look in the mirror with a profound newfound respect. They're performing an incredible juggling act every single day, absorbing the economic and biological shocks so that the young can grow and the old can rest.
I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over, building on a staggering number from our source material. The researchers noted that unpaid family caregiving, the vast majority of which is done by adults in the midlife demographic, is valued at roughly $470 billion annually.
Wow.
That is billion with a B.
Imagine, for just a moment, if midlife adults went on strike.
Oh, wow.
If they collectively decided to stop bridging the generations, if they stopped doing the unpaid emotional, physical, and financial labor of keeping both the youth and the elderly afloat.
Entire national economies would collapse overnight.
Yeah.
I mean, the commercial healthcare system would instantly buckle under the influx of millions of elderly patients who no longer have home care. The workforce would shatter as adult children lose their hidden parental safety nets.
Right.
So the question we must ask ourselves as a society is this: what would our world look like? And how would our workplace policies radically change if we actually treated that unpaid midlife labor as the essential economic GDP that it truly is?
That is a brilliant question to end on. If you are in the middle of that bridge right now, we see you. We see the invisible work you are doing, and science proves just how vital you are. You don't need a red sports car. You need paid family leave and a medal. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you next time.